What's up, my friends? My name is Cody Brockway, and you are back here for another brand new segment of Brockway's Vinyl Bites. And this one is really, really, really cool. Look who we got right here. This is Scott Davis of Myth of Logic. The new Myth of Logic record just dropped. It is Light at the End. If you want to go purchase the CD, the link will be down in the description here for Scott's Bandcamp page. Of course, you can stream it on Apple Music, YouTube, Spotify, all that fun stuff. The album is fantastic. Scott, very well done on the new record.
Thank you.
And of course, by the time you're watching this, you will have had the opportunity to participate in the live listen through over on Prog Radio and the Prog Corner. And that has just been super, super awesome. And Scott, I'm so honored to have you here today, man.
Well, thanks, man. I'm glad to see you're back. You've been out of it for a while, and yeah, it kind of cuts into my routine a bit when you're not out there posting stuff. So
I've been down with the pneumonia, but I seem to be coming out the other side. And so, unfortunately, Mrs. O'Reilly could not be here today, but she has some questions for you, just like I do. So we're going to go through the whole. We're going to go right back to the beginning about you and your musicianship and leading into Myth of Logic, and so on and so forth.
Okay.
And so the first question I got for you today is, how long have you been a musician?
Oh, I will be 60 years old this year in November. I first started messing around with guitars and such when I was about 13. It was Kiss for me, I mean, if you were a 13-year-old in the mid to late 70s, as I was, my world was Kiss for a number of years. I always like to tell people that Kiss was the band that made me want to play, and Rush was the band that made me want to play well. So that was the two-pronged horn. So at around 13, I started paying attention to guitars and such. It wasn't so much about, we were all sort of attracted by the theatrics and the stage show and everything. And in those days we had magazines, and that's it. There was no television coverage. I can remember once seeing a TV advertisement for a Kiss concert, and I nearly wet myself because the pictures were actually moving. We'd never seen anything like that, so it was very cool. But so around 13, I started dabbling in guitar, and it was semi-serious for a while. More of an affectation at that point than really commitment. And then as time started to go on and I got into 15 and 16, and I started failing miserably at athletics in every conceivable way. I remember the last year I tried out for the basketball team at Northern Hills Junior High in Topeka, Kansas. Was my last year of junior high before moving on to high school. And I tried out for the basketball team, and I wanted to play basketball. I really did. And I worked really hard, but I was just never any good. I don't possess body coordination. I have hand coordination. Right. I don't have, I'm not, yeah, it was never going to be. But the coach called me into his office after the tryouts, and all the cut lists had been posted. And he showed me that I was the highest guy on the cut list. I came that close. And I'm sure that his point in doing this for me was to inspire me to work harder. And instead, I just said, heck with this. I'm just going to go play guitar. And that's what I did from that moment on. It became a real obsession around the age of that would be 15 and 16. And then by the time I got to high school, it just sort of blossomed from there. Keyboards had always been, parallel to that. But by the time I got into high school and got in my first band, which was Hydra with my good friends, Duff Tool and Brian Bednasek, we were playing a lot of Rush songs. We were obsessed with Rush. We played a lot of other stuff. We played Police and Styx and the Babies, and we played Nuclear Apathy by Crack the Sky. That's who it was. We played a lot of that kind of stuff. And it was incumbent on me to be the singer and cover, a lot of keyboards, although Duff Tool, the guitar player, is a sensational keyboard player too. So we actually did a lot of stuff where we were both playing keyboards in a three-piece. So awesome. we were doing all that stuff, and it was sort of all developing concurrently. But yeah, so that's the long answer to the short question. I was around 13 when I started.
Cool, cool. And so, yeah, so you over the years have formed Mythologic, and you've got now 3 albums out. Can you hold them up? Can you show me? We've got
Yeah, the first one was this. Let's see, get my fingers out of the way. Surrounded
Surrounded
by
by
Ghosts. This was released 11/11/22, November 11th, 22.
Awesome.
Okay. And we followed that up New Year's Eve of last year, which I'm told is the dumbest thing you should ever do in the music business, is release an album in late December. But I did because the date was 123/123, and I just couldn't resist the numerology of it. It was dumb. That was the second one, Pictures from a Previous Dream.
Very
And
good
then-
album, by the way.
Yeah, thank you. And the new one is Light at the End.
Brand new out, already on the
Yeah.
shelves, some stores.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I'm very excited. I feel like, I didn't set out to write a trilogy, but by the time Surrounded by Ghosts was released and we got to the point where I was starting to work on new music, it became apparent that my main character is called Robin. You're going to hear us talk about Robin a lot today.
Yeah.
The reason I chose the name Robin is that Robin was going to be my name had I been born a girl. It was either Scott or Robin. And in those days, you didn't know in advance, so you had to pick two. So I've always kind of held that knowledge, and that name's always held a little bit of, fascination for me. And so I found a place to use it, and this was it.
Awesome.
It became apparent at the end of Surrounded that there was more to say. I had more to tell, and it just started to evolve. And about midway through Pictures, I went, okay, I know what's going to happen with him. It's going to have to be 3 records. And I'm hearing back from a lot of people who've received their pre-orders that they're treating it in that way. They're actually sitting down for 3.5 hours and listening to the entire thing as one piece. And that's sort of the intention. It's a big ask for modern attention spans, but it is a story and it all does fit together. So anyway, the first one was Surrounded by Ghosts.
Well, and that's the thing, is that people can tell when there's a lot of care put into something like this, and that really, really is evident in listening to your music.
Thank you.
And you actually beat me to a question I was about to ask.
Uh-oh, sorry.
What made you realize you wanted to make a trilogy of albums? But you've pretty much already.
Well, it kind of just happened organically, really. Some prog artists sit down with the intention of writing a long piece or writing a multi-album piece. And sometimes the material suffers for that, in my opinion, because you tend to say, okay, the goal is a certain length, not a certain story. And I think that helped in my case was because I came into this at the beginning of Surrounded by Ghosts, not realizing that it was going to be a trilogy. So it just kind of unfolded from there, so to speak.
Right on. And what people might not know is that you are a one-man band so far.
That's
You've
correct.
played every instrument on all the Mythologic records, and you do them all really well.
Thank
So, as a musician, though, we always tend, and I'm a musician too, so we always tend to have our sort of main go-to. Now, I know you started off with guitars. Is that your main go-to instrument to this day?
In a perfect world, if there was a band of guys, and in my head there was a band of guys, I was in a band for a while in the early 90s called Alchemy.
Right on.
And Alchemy were the hometown heroes in my town that I grew up in, Topeka, Kansas. It is an absolute crime to humanity that music those guys made is unknown to anyone outside that area. It's still some of my favorite music. I was actually the last singer in that band. I sang and played bass on about half the songs, and the keyboard player, Mike Kelso, was so insanely talented that he could actually play wonderful, fantastic, outrageous bass parts with his left hand while playing crazy keyboards with his right and doing backing vocals all at the same time.
Wow.
And not even thinking anything of it. He just got down to it. He never made a fuss over it. Those guys were all, it was Mike Kelso on keyboards, Joe Green on guitar, and the wonderful Terry Floyd was the drummer, and one of the joys of my life was having been in that band for any length of time. You know, it was less than 2 years, but it was a wonderful experience. And so, to answer your question, the band that I hear and see in my mind when I'm composing and recording is Alchemy. And in that band, I'm playing bass and singing. So that really is my heartbeat and my center, is playing bass guitar and singing. Keyboards would be a close second, followed by guitar in the distance. But I do have to pay equal attention to all of those things. The goal and the reason why it's not just called Scott Davis is that initially I wanted to fool people, or at least not pay attention to the fact that it was a one-man organization. I wanted them to listen to it with the idea that it is actually a band, because you listen differently. If you know that Stevie Wonder played everything, or if you know that Todd Rundgren played everything, you listen with different ears if you know that it's not a band. And I wanted people to really pay attention to the music and enjoy it without such considerations. So that's why it's Myth of Logic. But to circle back and answer your original question, I'm most comfortable when I'm playing bass and singing.
Right on, right on. Well, Myth of Logic is indeed a band, and it's a great band, even if it's just you or whoever else. But the projects have been good so far, and we are all the luckier for it.
Well, and fair warning, there's more coming.
Yeah. I've heard a little bit about that. Do you want to talk about the future and what is going to happen next with Myth of Logic? What's your next plan after this album?
Well, for the time being, as you can see behind me, most of my studio gear, I was mixing Light at the End up until 24 hours. I had to tear my studio apart and get everything out of there.
Yeah.
So I was really up against a deadline there, and fortunately, the landlord had graciously allowed that I could have a few more days if I needed it. But we were out of there on the 1st of August as scheduled. So I'm giving myself some time to kind of regroup and properly promote a little bit. Incidentally, while we're talking about promotion, the CDs are available exclusively at Bandwagon USA. So if someone's looking for them, if you go to Bandcamp, you will find downloads and you'll find files, and you can also buy the t-shirts there. But Bandwagon USA is the exclusive source for the CDs. They're actually running a really cool package right now where you can buy all 3 CDs for 20% off. You can get all 3 for $36. They're normally $15 a piece. So yeah, that's a pretty good deal. But at any rate, what's coming next is going to be another record. It will be a concept record. It will not be Robin. Robin's story is finished. I've completed that story, and actually, there's going to be an accompanying either book or a graphic novel that goes with the trilogy. There's a lot of stuff that I wrote, which I called the screenplay. And you can see the screenplay for Surrounded by Ghosts on our website. It's actually published on our website, mythoflogic.com. And I've got accompanying narration, if you will, for the other 2 as well. But I'm thinking it's either going to end up as a novel or a graphic novel eventually down the line. But I'm going to take the rest of this year and kind of, write and gestate and, sometime after the holidays, get my studio all hooked back up again and start again in earnest with an idea to having an album out, sometime in the fall of next year or the spring of 26.
Cool.
But yes, it has a title. The way I write is a little strange. I start with a title and I start with song titles. I actually do a title and track list. And I write to the song titles, and at that point, the other thing I write that's really weird, with a few exceptions, there's a song on the new album that I wrote on bass guitar, and there's another one that sprang from a piano solo. But for the most part, when I write, I sit down at the keyboard and I hear the whole thing. I hear instrumentation, arrangement, production. I hear the whole thing at once. And I just m- somehow my hands end up where I want them to on the keyboard. It's usually the keyboard that I write from, not always, but usually. So yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and you can hear with some of the really cool modulations and cool changes and stuff that is from a keyboardist's mind. When
Oh
you listen
yes.
to a lot of these
Yeah.
songs.
Yeah, I've had to use so many weird guitar tunings to suit it. It's not even funny. For instance, on this album, the bass guitars ended up tuned down a whole step to D, not drop D, but each string tuned down a whole step.
Wow.
It's for those of you who don't know, a bass guitar is usually tuned to E, and I tuned it to D because all of the notes that I needed to get to were in that register. I'm not a 5-string guy. I just a bass guitar has 4 strings, and that's the way I like it. If I need lower notes, I'll grab a synth and get those notes that way.
Somebody told John Mayung.
Well, yeah, no, that's the other thing. When there are players out there like John, really utilizing the instrument to its fullest. John was one of the first players that I can remember seeing when I saw Dream Theater on the Images and Words tour in a club in Kansas City called the Backstage.
Oh, wow.
At that time, he had just gotten his Tung 6-string Tung. It's a Japanese made, really unusual looking instrument. Sounded great. He was one of the first players that I'd ever heard really use all 6 strings and use them musically and effectively, and not in sort of a, gee, what's this new toy I have kind of thing.
Oh, yeah.
Most players who get a 5 or 6 don't ever utilize those notes, or typically don't utilize them much, but John really did. But in my mind, a bass guitar is a 4-string instrument. That's how my brain works.
Right on, right on.
Yeah.
So circling back to the idea of the Myth of Logic records, so you put out the first record in 2022.
Mhm.
When did you have the idea to create the whole Myth of Logic idea? What was the moment where you're like, I need to do something with all of this and put it to tape? What was the driving force behind the original Myth of Logic conception?
Well, I've always written in sort of a progressive mode, even when I was in bands that weren't necessarily progressive.
Right.
I was in a band for many years not many years, probably 5, I think, 4 or 5, Perfect Strangers, back in Topeka, and that was more of a pop band, but we were really, really good. And a lot of there's a song on the first album called Strange and Beautiful that was written in that period. That's the only song on that album that was not written at that time when the album was recorded. That one is one I've re-recorded several times over the years. And but it kind of sprung sort of from that. There were 2 things in my life that really 3 that kind of kicked it into high gear. My good friend from that band, Jim Beilman, the bass player, had been gently nudging me for like 20 years. I already had Surrounded by Ghosts. I didn't have Myth of Logic. I carried around Surrounded by Ghosts as a title for many years, and he kept nudging me. What's going on with that? What's going on with that? Well, eventually a couple of catalysts happened. My mother passed away in 2007 from Alzheimer's.
Sorry to hear that.
I don't recommend that experience. I don't.
Yeah.
And that was a real catalytic moment where it started leaking out at that time. And then a number of years later, my father passed away. He actually passed away during the recording of Surrounded by Ghosts. He never got to, well, I'm sure he's heard it, but he's not heard it on this plane.
Right. I'm sorry to hear that, my friend.
Yeah, it's, you're never prepared for how losing parents are going to affect you. And they both affected me in different ways for different reasons.
Of course.
But that was a lot of the catalyst. So along with Jim and my parents, that was the real nudges. And in terms of where the music came from, honestly, Cody, I have no idea. It just landed. I'm in my late 50s when I started this, right?
Yeah.
And it just, I've been a musician for so long, and it's part of who I am. And I think maybe it's that I reached a place in my head where I finally got out of my own way. And I was at a point where I could allow what I'd always been wanting to say to finally come out. And once the ball got rolling, I mean, it's still coming. I've got probably 20 minutes of material written for the next one.
Wow.
And then the new one is almost 74 minutes. It
Wow.
just, I don't know where it's coming from, but I'm as long as the faucet's on, I'm going to keep filling the buckets up.
And that leads me to another question. Sometimes as musicians, as creative people, sometimes it's easy to feel that the creative well runs dry.
Mhm.
And I don't think that's happened with how prolific you've been, but I do have to ask, when you feel that you need to boost your own creativity, what do you do? Do you go somewhere? Do you do something? What do you do to help get the creative juices flowing?
I don't do anything. I don't do anything. It comes when it comes. I don't. And it's different for everybody. I should preface all my remarks here by saying that it's very different. The process is different for everyone. There are as many different processes as there are people who make music, in my view. For me, as I said a few minutes ago, it was all about getting out of the way, getting out of my own way.
Yeah.
And as far as writer's block goes, I mean, I haven't reached that point yet. I'm sure I will at some point. Now that I have, something of a small fan base, I have pockets of fans in Japan and Germany and Poland and
Canada.
other places, Canada. It's a little different. It's a little different when you're creating, knowing that there's somebody waiting. Sorry, my glasses were stabbing me. When you know that there's somebody waiting to hear what you're working on. But
Right.
Honestly, I think one of the reasons why I've been able to get around that is that that's not why I make these records. A while back, an interviewer asked me, we were having a very lively, wonderful conversation, and he got quiet for a second. He said, "Why do you make these records?" And I thought about it for a minute, and I said, "Because I want to hear them."
Yeah, and that's the answer right there.
And I responded that way very specifically because I had just seen an interview with Neil Peart, and he confessed to never listening to an album after it was finished, unless he had to brush up on something for performances. He never listened to his own records for pleasure until the last 6 months of his life. And I found that a little sad, but that's how his process worked. That's who Neil was. But my own reaction to that was one that was a bit sad. And so when I was confronted with that conversation, it occurred to me suddenly out of the blue, well, I'm making these because I want to hear them. I want to enjoy them. So,
yeah, absolutely. Make the music because it's what you like to make. And I know that people like I'll use someone like Steve Hackett, for example, because he's a great example.
Very prolific.
His creative juices never flow out, but he always goes, he's in the Bahamas and doing this and that. And so I know he definitely attributes a lot of that to his creativity as well. And I was just wondering if you had anything like that, but it's just, you turn on the tap and it flows out. That's great.
I continue to live my life. I have things I do in my life outside music that I enjoy. And I'm very happily married and have been for over 20 years. And, I should mention at this point, since I've already broached the subject, I have to give special thanks to my wife, Angie. None of this is possible without her, period. Her support and indulgence when I was, I basically went into a coma for 3 years and stuck my head up the backside of Myth of Logic, every available Saturday and, late every night. I mean, it was a lot of a time commitment on my part, and she supported me every single step of the way. Never any. She's just been fantastic, and she actually does some voiceover work on 2 of the albums.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah, if you hear a female voice speaking, she's on Surrounded by Ghosts, and she's also on the new one, Light at the End. Well, she's actually on the her voice is at the very beginning of Pictures from a Previous Dream too. Her voice represents Robin's wife, who he's lost in this story, and it sort of drives him through his whole experiences. And her voice represents his wife. So
That's touching, man. That's touching.
Yeah.
And that actually that actually helps lead me to another question.
Okay.
Who would be your ideal musician to collaborate with, and why? You could pick anyone.
Oh, I would love to work with Nick DiVirgilio. I absolutely he's such a complete musician.
Yeah,
Aside from being an astounding drummer, he's personally responsible for my favorite record of all time, which is an album called "The Shaming of the True," which was Kevin Gilbert's posthumously completed effort. He and John Cunaberti, the producer, saw that project through to completion because they were obsessed with it. I would love to work with Nick. I think Nick is a fascinating guy and a great drummer. I
yeah,
mean, the drums on my albums are they are necessitated by my budget, which is next to nothing. If I ever get to a point where I've got a little more budget for my records, you're going to hear a proper drummer on there. It's not by any ego on my part or anything of that sort. It's just a matter of economics. I had to. That was one of the areas where I had the one area I would not compromise on was mastering. The most excellent Alan Douches over at West Side, who has Grammys to his credit, has always mastered my records, and he always will as long as he's willing to do it for me. And that, as you can imagine, costs money. And so a lot of, part of why I do it by myself is that I like having, the great Trevor Rabin once said when asked, when you're a songwriter, there are two ways to do a song, your way and the wrong way. Bless him.
Yeah, that's a good one.
I've always liked that quote, and Trevor can back it up because Trevor can make completed records all by himself.
Oh,
So,
look at Rio. That Rio album is amazing.
Yeah. Go seek out the demos he did for 90125. They're out there under the title 90124, I think.
I've heard some of them.
They're astounding. I mean, they were releasable, but yeah.
And that actually leads me to, and you're helping lead me along to other questions. If you had to narrow it down, which bands and artists had the biggest impact on you during the writing of Light at the End?
That's a very good question.
Thank you.
When I was doing Surrounded, I had a short laundry list of albums that were inspirational. Wind and Wuthering by Genesis. Trilogy by Emerson, Lake and Palmer. Mask by Kansas.
Oh yeah, all my favorites, man.
Their best album. You can't convince me otherwise. And that's a band who hasn't done too many bad albums. And Mask is, just
that has
absolute.
My favorite That's my favorite song on there. So
yeah. It seems like there was one other, but it's escaping me now. But yes, there were specific albums going through my mind. And it's funny because as the creator of this stuff, I can tell you what I was thinking and what I was influenced by when I created it. And almost no one hears that when they listen to it. It's been my experience. For instance, the first song on Surrounded by Ghosts is a song called Here. Right. And it's Wind and Wuthering era Genesis, just completely wholesale, multi-layered arpeggiated guitars and Taurus pedals with no bass guitar and big Mellotronic kinds of keyboards and such. But no one's ever said that to me. Oh, you're really, really lifting Genesis right there. Oh, the other album was Permanent Waves by Rush.
I think with what you just mentioned there is that, and I had this listening to the new album, The Light at the End. I can tell your influences, but it doesn't sound derivative. It sounds very original, and it's not like you can just pinpoint. And go, oh, well, that's that. That's that. It's like, no, this is Myth of Logic. It sounds totally like it stands on its own two legs, and it
Thank
doesn't
you.
sound like any one thing in particular. I hear a lot of Emerson influence, but I don't. It's not like, oh, that sounds like Genesis, or that sounds like this, or that sounds like that. It you can hear the influences, but it doesn't sound too much like one thing aside from what it is. Myth of Logic.
I think, I've had long conversations with my wife about this. We have great conversations. And we've had long conversations about why it is. I think it has to do with, I mean, my progressive influences are always in the front of my mind, but the music I first remember in our house growing up, my mom had an absolutely beautiful singing voice. And I mean, Judy Garland level singing voice. She could have and maybe should have become a professional. She was that good.
Wow.
But she'd be flitting around the house, cleaning and dusting and doing whatever and singing. And there would be records playing. She loved the Beatles. She loved Johnny Mathis. She loved the Carpenters. We heard Elton John in that house a lot.
Nice.
So my most primal influences at the very beginning of my appreciation for music are all very melodic and very pop based. Whether I'm conscious about it or not, Myth of Logic music tends to have a very straight melodic flow. It doesn't stray too far. It doesn't get too weird, and goes away from that. And I think that might be my affinity for, pop music, like I have just, listed off with you. It has a lot to do with melody. Everything is melody. Everything.
Yeah.
And I try not to do that. I try to avoid certain cliches, particularly modern cliches. You're not going to hear a lot of, shred guitars through Mesa Boogies, with that sound. You're going to
Right.
hear cleaner, more friendly approaches to guitars, although there's some crunchy things, sprinkled throughout. I try to always remember that everything should be melodic. Even the drums, if you listen to some of my drum parts, there are some bits in there that echo melodies and things of that nature.
Yeah.
I'm hoping to expand on that sometime in the future. Like I said, once the budget is there, I'll probably invite a real drummer to the party, and real by someone who's not just a frustrated wannabe drummer like me.
Well, yeah, I'm super excited to see what's next for Myth of Logic, and we've had some conversations about certain drummers and this and that without putting anything in stone. But yeah, it's very exciting to see what you've got on the horizon, and also what you've just put out with this new record. Is very good, very good. I have more questions here. What are
Shoot.
some of the difficulties you may have faced along the way in the recording process of these albums? Like, I know you said that you had to move and all that fun stuff. Is there any other sort of big mountains that you had to overcome in order to get these records?
Well, that's a good question, and it's fairly technical. The moving part happened after it was all over, when the dust had settled. So it was there, and it was a little bit of pressure, but we knew about it a year in advance. So, that's when I really shifted into high gear for the last album and got it going. When I started in on Surrounded by Ghosts, I do not use Pro Tools.
Right on.
I do not use a computer-based system, and
What do you use?
I use a Tascam DP32 SD, which is a standalone digital recorder, and it records to smart cards, SD cards. I have
Okay.
a lot of those. The reason is very simple. It's very limiting technology when compared with something like Pro Tools. It really is. I probably should have converted myself to Pro Tools 10 years ago. The problem is now the music is coming, and I don't want to take a year off to learn how to use Pro Tools, because that's what it would take for me to get as fluent, or as fluid, if you will, with Pro Tools as I am on the Tascam. I know its limitations. I know exactly how to get what I want out of it, My main sequencer is an Ensoniq SQ80 built in 1987.
Oh,
But I can practically sequence on that thing without even looking at it. So that's always my question to people when they say, "Oh, you need Pro Tools or you need, whatever else the new software or whatever it is that's hideously expensive and requires you to continue to spend money for licensing and whatever else. Is it going to help me write better songs? No. Is it going to help me play better? No. Is it going to help me sing better? No. The answer to all those real questions in my mind is no. So when I first started into this, I was moving from, I used to use a Roland 16 track, and it had started to develop a little bit of, let's just say, quirks. It wasn't ever crashing on me, but it was hard drive based. And the Tascam had the attraction of being completely solid state, no moving parts. And so I took the dive, and I was halfway through recording Surrounded by Ghosts and decided to eject, get the Tascam, and start all over again. And that's what I did. And I've been very happy with the results. All 3 records were recorded to the same machine.
awesome.
Other technical things that happened along the way are probably not of that much interest. At one point, I had the entirety of the drum parts for pictures recorded, and I had one piece of gear. It was a 4-channel compressor gate limiter thing that I was using on my kick, snare, and toms, and it died on me.
Oh.
And I replaced it with a unit that sounded 100 times better. I'm not going to mention the old unit, but the new unit was a DBX, and it just knocked it out of the park. It was so much better. I said, well, gonna have to re-record all the drums again. So I did. And that was for pictures from previous dream.
Right.
So there, and a couple other things too. You've probably noticed that my vocal style is very expressive, and I can go from a whisper to a scream sometimes in the same line. So I was struggling with the microphone I was using, which I really love. I was using an AKG Perception 400.
Right.
And I was chatting with, I believe it was Alan Douches one day, and I was expressing my frustration with him. And he said, "Do you have an SM7B?" And I said, "No." And he said, "Well, you might want to try an SM7B. It worked for Michael Jackson on Thriller. It might be good for you too." So at his suggestion, I went and got one, and it changed the entire vocal sound altogether. I was much happier.
Awesome.
One of the drawbacks, and people are horrified when I say this, one of the drawbacks of that Tascam, there's virtually, at mix time, I have access to one effects processor. That's it. One stereo effects processor that can be dialed in appropriately to individual channels. So in other words, if I want something else, I either have to print it to a pair of channels on there if I want stereo, or I have to record it coming in. So when I record a vocal, I'm recording the compression and whatever gating and what it's going in live. I cannot change it later. I can't. So that sort of, you have to be able to think ahead to what the mix is. And when I told you earlier that I can actually hear the entire picture in my head when it's created, that little quirk has become very helpful, because with this machine, I have to kind of know where I'm going with the sound and the processing and everything. So,
right.
yeah. So there's not been any real tragedies along the way. I had a mini disc recorder go down. I used to master to mini disc, and now I actually master to, the masters that I send off to, the master mixes that I send off to Alan, I actually create those inside the machine now. But I used to mix to a mini disc and then send that off to Alan. But now I'm actually mixing inside the box. If someone out there looking to get into easy to use digital recording, the Tascam units are all extremely, I think mine was $600, and it does 32 channels of 24-bit audio. So it's,
wow, awesome.
I've been happy with it. Yeah, I've been real happy with it.
Wicked. All right. Well, thank you for answering that.
Yeah.
Going back to the 3 albums overall, so we got Surrounded by Ghosts, Pictures from a Previous Dream, and the brand new one, Light at the End, which I reiterate just came out on Sunday. Super great album. So the albums are based on the concept of Robin. So for someone who's just coming into Myth of Logic and is watching this video and wants to know about the concept that ties the three records together, do you have a brief synopsis of how they could be linked together?
Okay, Robin is my main character. And at certain points in the story, you won't understand what's going on with him because he doesn't. At the beginning of Surrounded by Ghosts, he's led to this stone house by somebody he can't make out their features or anything, but he knows that they're friendly. And he's led to this upstairs room that has no windows and no doors. And he's standing there in the gloom, and suddenly he's attacked from all sides by he can't really even describe it at first. And the album Surrounded by Ghosts is really it's a series of battles for him where he has to fight off various threats and foes, let's call them. I don't want to give too much away. I want people to kind of experience it, but he's trapped in this room where there's no way out and he can't even see the walls. If you look at the cover of Surrounded by Ghosts, one of the reasons I love this painting is there's Robin and he's clearly in attack mode. He's got a sword, but he can see an enemy that we can't see. There's nothing there. It's either smoke or it's a wall. We don't know. He can see it, but we can't. He's in his own world there. So each song on Surrounded by Ghosts is a different test that he has to endure. At a certain point, the sword that he has in his hand presents itself to him, and it's talking to him, it's communicating with him, and preparing him for each successive battle that he comes up against. Eventually, at some point in the story, the sword reveals that in order for him to get out, he has to melt the sword down in The Crucible, which is a song on there. He has to melt it down, and if he does, it will create a key, and a door will appear, and that's how he gets out. So it's basically about redemption, and it's about self-forgiveness for whatever you perceive you may have done wrong in your life. You're giving yourself permission to unlock yourself from that room of no doors and no windows and go on with your life. Wow. And that's how it ends up. And that's the last song on there, Surrounded by Ghosts, and he walks off into the mist. Well, at the beginning of Pictures from a Previous Dream, he discovers he didn't get out.
Oh, God.
Still in there. But it's a different story this time. He's been taken to a place called the Gallery. And inside the gallery, it's limitless. It's like a space field in there. If you look on the cover, you can see him. He's sitting in here in this gallery. And the thing I love about this painting that Charlie did, you're not sure if he's inside the painting or if he's sitting in space in front of it looking at the frame.
Yeah, that's definitely an awesome album cover. Wow.
Yeah. Right. So he's in this gallery, he's taken here, and he doesn't understand why. But it's different from the Stonehouse in that he's not fighting for his life. He's not an active participant. And through the series of vignettes, or let's call them songs, because that's what they are, each song on this album is a picture, a painting. Every one of those paintings was painted by someone who died shortly after they painted it. And then the painting disappeared because no one had ever experienced it. Turns out the purpose of a painting is to be experienced by a human, to be seen by human eyes and experienced. That is their purpose. They need that. All of the angst and the desire and the lust and the anguish that made that painter create that painting ends up inside it. So all of these paintings came to the gallery, and they're hanging around him in this circle, and they present themselves to him one at a time. And each of them is a different story. The first one is called Hypogeum, and the Hypogeum, if you know anything about Rome, was the area underneath the stadiums where the gladiators and the animals and everything were kept. And it was a place of great misery and great heartache. So after a couple of these vignettes present themselves to Robin, he begins to realize that he's been brought here for a reason. And that reason is to experience these paintings because they need him. They need him in order to be able to complete their purpose and complete their task. So the lesson that Robin learns in pictures is to take what he's learned and the strength that he's given himself and give it away, give it to others, be there for others. And that allows him to move on at the end of pictures. That's how he escapes from that. At the beginning of Light at the End, he wakes up in his apartment in the city, and he's by himself, and he remembers why he sent himself away for the first two albums. He's basically been in his own head. He's been in a fugue state, a dream state, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
He doesn't know how long he was in there, but it wasn't long, maybe 12 hours. But he wakes up in his apartment. He realizes the finality and the truth of his life. It's horrible, and he hates it, and that's why he sent himself away. He's a thief. He's a very good high-end thief. He breaks into the homes of very rich, very corrupt people, and he steals everything he can get his hands on. That's what he does for a living. He's also married, and his wife is in the army. She's in the military. She goes away for 2 tours of duty, goes back for a third, and gets herself killed. And this is what sends him on this spiral, is that he can't face his life. He can't face the anguish of being without her. He doesn't understand. He understands her motivation and love of country, but he doesn't understand why she's gone. And he's looking for answers. He's asking the universe. He's upset. He's anguished. In the song "A Thief's Misfortune," which is already out there as a single,
I love that song. I love that song. Sorry to interrupt.
No, that's fine. That's Robin coming back, trying to come back to his old life and discovering to his horror that he can't steal anymore. That's not who he is anymore. He can't do it. It's the one thing he was good at in his life, and he can't do it. He's without his wife, who he loved, and he doesn't understand. In the midst of all this, the song "Purple Heart" is because he's sitting in his apartment, anguished, and a delivery person comes to the door with her Purple Heart medal, and he doesn't know what to do about it. What do I do with this? What is this? My wife is gone. I don't understand why, and I've got this medal. What do I do with this? The dedication on the album, I don't know whether you've seen it or not. It is to, I'll just read it to you if I can see it in the slide in here. Dedicated to the spirit and valor of all past and present members of the armed forces, first responders, and law enforcement personnel. We are, all of us, honored by your sacrifice, ever vigilant, ever faithful, never forgotten. Wonderful. And that really, excuse me for a minute. That's paramount to the story, because Robin he's put himself through the experience of surrounded by ghosts and pictures from a previous dream in an effort to try to continue with his life in some way, even if it means to end his life and go somewhere else. It's not made clear, but that's where he is. He's lost his wife. His life as it was is gone, and he doesn't know what to do about it. So it's the rest of the album is him figuring it out, trying to come to grips with it, going a little bit mad as you would. That's what Abulia is about, which I love all the songs on it. In terms of the full production songs, that might be my favorite. Although, As Long as It's Dark, I think is the best song I've ever written. Abulia is my dad was a psychologist with the VA hospital, and he was constantly giving me little weird terms and things. And abulia is a psychological term. It's a state of mind characterized by a complete lack of self-control. And that at that point in the story, he's just gone completely mad. He's angry at the whole world. He's angry at everybody. He's angry at the universe, and he wants somebody to pay. But eventually he comes to a place of peace and grace, and he figures out what he has to do. But that's what the whole journey is about. It's about various states of you know, it might sound a little bit 12-step-ish now that I'm saying it all out loud, but it's not really. It's really about more giving yourself permission to be a human being and reminding yourself that the best thing you can do as a human being is to give what you have when you can for others.
There you go.
That's, you know, if you've ever wondered who the guy that gives money to those people at the side of the road with the signs, I'm guilty of that. I do it all the time. Some people will castigate me for it. Some people say I'm a fool, you know. Oh, you know what they're going to do with that money? I don't care what they do with that money. All I know is what I did with that money.
Yeah.
And that's all that's about relinquishing control over things that really aren't in your control. That's the lesson that Robin learns ultimately, is that there are forces that rule your life, and you can't control any of those. But what you can do is you can learn who you are and gain strength from that, and you can try to be there for people that you care about. Yeah. So.
Yeah, and that's one of the and yeah, that wow, great explanation of the concept of the trilogy.
A little long-winded, sorry.
Oh no, that's totally fine, and this was the space to do that. It's like that's so what it kind of means to me is like, no matter how much of the awful stuff that Robin has gone through, eventually he's come through on the other side with a lesson about it and a way to sort of turn it around. And I think that can be applied to so many aspects of life, you know, because sometimes people make bad decisions and bad choices, but it's about, or some people end up in just in unfortunate, you know, scenarios and situations. But as long as you can take that and turn it around and still continue to be true to yourself and be a good human at the end of the day, there it is. And mythologically,
my mentor, when my wife and I left South Dakota in 2004, my old friend and mentor Pete Galindo said to me, "Keep your head down, do good work, take care of people."
Yeah, exactly.
And I have done my best. I'm human, so I'm not always successful, but I have done my best to follow that mantra as much as possible. And it really, the story of Robin here springs from all of that. It's really, you know, there are fantastical elements to it, and you know, it's got, you know, it's progressive rock, so it's gonna take you on a journey. That's the intended design. But hopefully, you know, hopefully once people understand the story, they can gain something personal out of it. Which is why too, if you'll notice in the lyrics, Robin is never mentioned by name in the lyrics. He is mentioned by name in the accompanying text that I've written for all three albums. His wife's name is never mentioned. I went round and round and round about that. I decided not to give her a name because I wanted the focus to be on him and his feelings and how he was, you know, she's gone. She's not around anymore. And, you know, I wanted the reader or the listener to really focus in more on him. I know what her name is, but I'm not going to reveal that because I wanted to keep the focus where it is, and that's on him. There are no other names mentioned in the text. For instance, in the text for it is the Lazarus Hex.
One of my favorite tunes. Love it.
Yeah, which you played this last week on your show. Thank you for that.
Yes, at 12 noon Eastern, Prague Radio. Boom, let's get it.
Plug that bad boy. Absolutely. That song is about a serial killer.
Maybe that's why I liked it.
A really, really bad guy. He's very famous and very powerful, power over people. It's not made clear if he's a politician or if he's a clergy or just a shyster, but he has control over people. Yes. And he likes to kill young girls, and then he picks the wrong one. He picks a young girl who actually has magical abilities.
Uh-oh.
Yeah. And she casts a curse on him called the Lazarus Hex. And what it means is that he is a rich and powerful man, and he's used to comfort and power over people. That's who he is. This is the lesson in that song for Robin, is not to tie your identity up in external things. That's not who anyone is, really. What happens is he finds out he's actually serving, his master is, well, let's call it what it is. He's serving evil. He's serving Satan. He's sending souls to the devil, essentially. That's his job. Then he finds out he has terminal cancer, and he's overjoyed because he's finally going to go to hell and assume his rightful place next to the master. Well, what happens is she casts the spell called the Lazarus Hex, and what happens is he does die, but he comes back as a nobody. He has nothing. He doesn't even have clothes on his back. He's completely homeless, and he's completely miserable, and he can't die. And he's stuck that way for the rest of eternity. But the caveat to the spell is that she suffers the exact same fate. That was the price. So she's also stuck here with nothing and no one, but so is he. That was the cost of the spell. That's what that entire thing is about. He's a serial killer, and he's a rotten bastard. And I really feel strongly about, the way that you carry yourself,
Yes,
and
absolutely.
obviously this is a guy who was wearing a face for the world and being a completely different person underneath. And there's a lot of people like that out there. So that was Robin's lesson, is to not get tied up in material things and tying your identity up in riches or fame or anything like that. You need to remember who you are. So, yeah.
Absolutely. You got to look at yourself and absolutely. Yeah. I feel that exactly 100%. And then there's some people who are so focused on the outside things that they don't take the time to look at what's inside.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. And I'm not one of those people. I'm constantly looking in, what can I do to better myself and be better to people around me? And that's yeah. Wow. Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, Scott, I want to say thank you so much for taking the time out of your day today to come and talk about this, and congratulations.
My pleasure.
On the album, Myth of Logic, Light at the End. It's out now. Tell the listeners where they can buy a physical copy of your CD once again.
The physical CDs are available at Bandwagon USA. That's two separate words, band and wagon. It's not one word. Bandwagon USA. They have each individual CD, and they have a package of all three at a 20% savings. You can order now. They are in stock on all three CDs, and will ship out, immediately, as far as I know, or pretty close. I've ordered stuff from them before. And have a look around while you're there, because they've got all kinds of stuff. They've got Emerald City Council. They've got Big Big Train. They've got Magenta. They've got a whole bunch of just stellar progressive rock offerings over there. And you can get it all in one place and put it all in the same shopping cart. Save yourself some money in the process too. So the CDs are available at Bandwagon USA. And streaming everywhere, and Bandcamp has the high quality downloads if that's what you're into. The downloads on Bandcamp, I've upgraded them recently. They are all 24K or 24-bit 96K lossless streaming. So if you purchase those, you get the highest quality there is. Those are exactly the masters that were sent to me from Alan with no compression whatsoever. They're big files, but that's really the best way to listen to that stuff, I think.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And, all the links for everything will be down in the description. So do what you can to support Myth of Logic and Scott Davis. Great music made from a super intelligent and creative gentleman himself, as you know. He's been on the channel numerous times, but this one is all about the Myth of Logic, because we're so happy about the new record. And thank you so much, Scott, for coming on.
Thanks,
to you, man. Loyal viewers, don't forget to like and subscribe, share this video, spread the good word of the Myth of Logic, and like and subscribe to Brockway's Vinyl Bites for more cool content. We'll be back soon with some other cool information and very cool stuff, some cool eye candy that you'll want to have a look at. All right, folks, thank you so much for watching. Peace out, and don't forget, you know what the most important piece of advice is, Scott?
Rock on.
That's right, rock on.